Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bowen, the reliability rating, could you just explain that to us in a bit more detail? Obviously, there would be core elements or fixed elements that the PBO would use to assess the reliability rating. Can you just take us through that in detail?
Senator, I'll make one comment and I will hand over to Mr. Brown. The estimate we give is always our best estimate, but we do provide the reliability rating.
Which is a qualification or a caveat?
Well, it's an indication that the point estimate could vary, certainly. But
before you do that, Mr. Bowen, a couple of times you have mentioned in evidence today that the further you go beyond the forward estimates, the less reliable the financial implication of the measure is. Is that is correct, isn't it?
Well, in general terms, I think that is a fact. But Mr. Brown could enlarge on the reliability indicator.
Certainly. Senator, the reliability assessment that we do, we look at three things. First of all, we look at the data and how good is the data. What's the source of the data? Is it a reliable source? Is it, for instance, high quality administrative data derived from tax returns, for instance, is an example of that, where you can place a high degree of faith in the fidelity of that data. Less reliable data may be, in some cases, some survey data, and you go down, depends on the source of the survey, who conducted it. For instance, Australian Bureau of Statistics data often is based on surveys, but those are very scientifically conducted, and they will give you an idea of what the standard errors are in it. So you've got a pretty good idea, is it good or is it less good? Then you have data that could come from other sources, very small surveys, straw polls, whatever. They're still data, but they may not be particularly reliable. So data is one thing. And in some cases, data is very poor and very scarce. We then go to assumptions that have to be made in order to complete a costing. So you don't have data for everything. Sometimes you have to fill in gaps, and you may use assumptions to do that, or you may need to make assumptions in relation to things like, for instance, behavioural effects, so how people will react to a costing, etc. We assess the quality of assumptions based on the evidence that actually underpins them and whether or not there is good evidence or not. That will go to things like, is it actually based on an academic paper, research? Have people conducted that scientifically? Is it peer reviewed? Or is the assumption at the other end, it could be purely judgment based. You don't actually have data for, or good research underpinning everything. In some cases, the only thing you can do is make a judgment as to how big something may be. The third element of a costing that we look at in assessing reliability is the volatility of the thing you're trying to estimate itself. So that can vary quite a bit. For instance, if somebody gives us a policy and they say, we want to provide a $20 million grant over 4 years to this particular activity, how much does it cost? There's probably not a lot of volatility or uncertainty in how much something like that costs. However, if you're trying to estimate over a period of time something which is very volatile in its behaviour, goes up and down a lot, and you can see things like capital gains tax might be a good example of that. It can vary a lot from year to year because it depends on so many factors. So something like that is inherently volatile and is very hard to estimate, and just because of that, even if you have very good data and you have no assumptions, you can still end up with something where the reliability, the costing is still low because what you're trying to hit moves all over the place. Now, if you take a series like that, and you try and estimate it out for 10 years, then you could easily get something which where the reliability declines quite significantly the further you go out because of the compounding uncertainty that's associated with it.
Does the reliability rating, is it a numeric rating, 1 out of 5, 5 out of 5, or is it a written statement?
It's a qualitative assessment, so we will put it, there will be a high, medium, low type assessment that we include in our advice. And if it's due to particular factors that are noteworthy, we will often note what those are as well.
So when a customer or client says that something's been fully costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, that's a heavily qualified statement that they make, isn't it?
As Mr. Bowen indicated, the costings that we do are the best costing that we can do with the available resources that are there. The reliability statement is something which goes to, well, how much credence can you put to the point estimate and how likely is it to vary over a period? And that applies in the case of any costing that is done.
Senator, if I could just add, we make explicit in the costings that we do what would be implicit in the costings that are in the budget. Really, it's a very similar process. We feel that it's important to give the reader, the client, if you like, a feel for just how reliable this costing is. But at the end of the day, if you're preparing a budget or you're preparing an alternative budget, you have to have a point estimate. And as we have said, the point estimates we give are our best, based on our best judgment.
So because people do stand by the costing that's been provided to them by the Parliamentary Budget Office, they do sort of, often put it out there in very, very loud terms that this has been fully costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office. But of course that means different things, because you're saying to me that statement, fully costed, actually has a number of other statements that sit behind that. One is the reliability statement or reliability assessment. Why do we not detail what's in the reliability assessment to give the public a better understanding of how that fully costed statement is provided?
Well, could you?
Yep, so people will stand by the fact that they have got a costing from the PBO, and they will say this is fully costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office as a way of demonstrating to the community or to other stakeholders that this is a reliable estimate. But in fact, you're telling me that what sits behind that estimate is a reliability assessment.
What I'm telling you, Senator, is that behind any costing, whether done by the PBO, Treasury, Finance, the Department, there are assumptions which determine the reliability of that costing.
Yeah.
We are no different in that sense, except that we make it explicit in the material that we provide to our clients.
But not the material, but you don't make it a requirement that the client makes that qualification known to the public.
Senator, that's not within my power to do.
Oh, so would good practice be for a client to detail what the reliability assessment said around the costing?
Senator,
the budget papers as well.
It is.
I don't think any Treasury or Finance
It is in the
officer
tax
will want
expenditure
that.
statement,
That's right.
Senator, as you would know. But, Senator, this goes to the heart.
This one's low.
Sorry, this goes. This
made this one up.
This goes to
Don't
the
get
heart.
distracted, Mr.
There's
Barnes.
too many interruptions.
I'm
Mr.
not
Bowen.
distracted.
I'm joking, I'm joking.
Place attention, sir.
This
Mr. Bowen,
goes to
continue.
the heart of our legislation, which requires me and my office to preserve confidentiality until such time as a document that we produce for somebody, some member or senator, is made public by that senator or member. So my hands are tied under the current legislation. I cannot release that document in its entirety if the person requesting it has not done so.
And I understand that. So when someone uses the statement fully costed by the PBO, that statement may be accompanied by a varying degree of reliability around that saving.
It will always be. It will always be. But you shouldn't read anything unusual in that.
Except that yours is an office that is required to give public confidence around particular initiatives of individuals in all parties in the Parliament. Yours is an institution aimed at providing public confidence around a set of figures that might be used by individuals or parties in the Parliament to demonstrate how they might construct an alternative budget.
Well, we certainly are one institution that has that role, and we treat it very seriously. But when we are asked to prepare a costing on a confidential basis, in fact, the Act doesn't use the term asked, it uses the term directed by the requestor. I have no option but to preserve that confidentiality.
If the media or myself was to ask someone who'd had a policy costed by the PBO and was using the fact that it had been costed by the PBO to sort of demonstrate support and credibility, if I was to say to them, oh, please show me, please explain to me the reliability assessment that accompanies that statement and that costing, would that be good practice for the client or the customer to provide that information? Because, of course, it's not your information, it's their information now. Would it be good practice for them to make that available?
Senator, I can only go back to the way in which Parliament set up the PBO and the arrangements around that. If Parliament felt that it would be worthwhile having all of our documents released, then we would go along with that.
So
Just a moment, Senator Smith, Mr. Bowen. The committee, for the advice of anyone who's listening, the committee is scheduled to break at 12:30. We are going to continue and try and conclude the Parliamentary Budget Office before we go to lunch.
I'm happy to, but
Yes,
when I get the
and so I'm saying this in a gentle way of saying let's facilitate the conclusion of questions.
Right.
Senator Smith.
Thank you. So you're not at liberty to share with me what the reliability assessment might be around particular proposals that have been...
Not if they haven't been released, Senator, no.
That's a shame.
But, so when Chris Bowen, the Shadow Treasurer, says that there'll be $14.3 billion worth of savings over 10 years, based on your previous evidence about the unreliability of savings or any budget calculation when you move beyond the 4 years, people should be distrusting of that $14.3 billion savings measure that's being talked about because it goes over 10 years. I'm fascinated to know what the reliability assessment says, but I'll ask Chris Bowen that. I might even ask Senator Wong that. So the $14.3 billion saving measure over 10 years sounds to me, based primarily on what you've said about the fact that as you move beyond the forward estimates, it gets harder and harder to accurately calculate a savings, might not actually be true.
Senator, given that...
Because Mr. Chris Bowen says it's been fully costed by the Independent Budget Office.
Senator, given that Mr. Bowen, Chris Bowen, has indicated that we have fully costed his policy, I can acknowledge that we have done that. Okay. I can also acknowledge that our best estimate of the cost of his policy is that 14 billion over a decade.
But we've heard that the
Safe.
complexity compounds to, is the word that your official use, the complexity compounds the further you move beyond the forward estimates. So whether or not the $14.3 billion saving is accurate is challenged by the fact that it's over 10 years, and by your own evidence you've said that's unreliable when you move beyond the forward estimates. And we don't know what the reliability assessment is.
Senator, I didn't say it was unreliable beyond the forward estimates. I think we need to correct the record there. I said the reliability can become less the further out you go. I didn't say it was unreliable, and I maintain...
But it can be less reliable, is
well,
what you said.
Well, it can be less reliable, but I maintain that that is our best estimate.
But going to the reliability assessment, we don't know what, my word, not your word, qualifications have been put around that 14.3 billion.
Is unreliable.
It seems to be a standoff between silence here.
I thought that was a statement, Senator, not a question. But
well, it's not. It's not a fair question. It's not a fair question, Mr. Bowen, because you can't comment on the reliability assessment. That's true. Yeah.
Have you concluded, Senator Smith? Mm-hmm.